Recording. All
Hi,
right.
Salaja.
Hi, Paula. How are you? How are you
Uh,
doing? I'm so excited to chat.
Same here. I can't wait. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start. And welcome to everyone who's joining us for the ALA Midwinter conference. Sorry we couldn't be together, but this virtual conference is working out really well for some of small publishers like us here at Mango and Marigold Press.
Yeah,
So, really excited to chat with everyone.
super excited to chat with everyone. So, Salaja, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started Mango and Marigold Press.
Yeah, so my name is Sailaja Joshi. I am the CEO and founder of Mango and Marigold Press. Mango and Marigold Press is an award-winning independent publishing house that shares the sweet and savory stories of the South Asian experience. Our company was founded actually 6 years ago now under the name Bharat Babies, and it started out of my own sort of frustration and experience of becoming a new mom and not being able to find books that reflected my culture, history, and heritage on the bookshelves. I did find some stuff, but the things that I found were often developmentally inappropriate, culturally inaccurate, or culturally insensitive. And so I reached a point where I was frustrated by the narrative being written and told. And so I decided to write a new one. And that was in the form of starting an entire publishing house. It's been a long, incredible journey. We changed our name almost a year ago. We have branched out from doing more than just board books, illustrated books, and early readers. We now do art series, texts, YA anthologies, and of course, middle grade novels. And yours is our first one and my personal favorite of all
Hey.
fantasy books I read. I am not a biased party at all.
No, not at all. And
Yeah.
and
So,
I'm so
Kyle.
glad you started Mango and Marigold Press because that's the beginning of my author journey. So,
Yeah. So tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and why you wrote Raya.
So I'm Payal Doshi and I'm from Mumbai, India. I live in the States now, but I'm Indian. And I wrote Ria and the Blood of the Nectar because growing up, I loved to read, but I never read any children's books with Indian or South Asian characters as the main heroes or the protagonists. I never saw them on the covers. And I realized it was about time that we had more representation and we saw that, and the future generation gets to see themselves in books. And so that's what prompted me to write Ria and the Blood of the Nectar. I'm very proud of this book. It took 10 years for me to write this book. I have a management degree and a master's in management. So it was a long process until I stumbled onto writing. That's how Ria and the Blood of the Nectar came to be. Ria and the Blood of the Nectar is a story about 12-year-old Ria Chetri from Darjeeling, India, whose twin brother Rohan goes missing on the night that they turn 12. From then, she goes off on this secret quest. She portals into a magical world and she has to unearth clues. She has to confront dark truths about her past. She has to battle magical creatures and find the courage in her to save her brother Rohan. And it is the first book in a trilogy called The Chronicles of Estranthia. And it releases May 2021, and I'm super excited for it.
I am too. It's been a really wonderful journey to watch this book come to life. I remember you submitting your first chapter and reading it and being like, I have to publish this. And it was a really important milestone in, I think, both of our career and for both of us in this world. So tell me, Pyle, a little bit about your journey of getting published. What was some of the feedback you got from other publishers? I'm super curious.
Well, that's a really great question. My journey to publishing took 2 years. I was down in the trenches, querying all of 2018 and 2019. And I did get some really good feedback. My book was long initially, and it was to bring it down. But some of the recurring points that kept coming up was that they really loved the book, but they couldn't have another Indian author on their roster because they already had another Indian fantasy, a very similar book like mine. They wanted my book to be more Indian. My fantastical world is a East meets West kind of utopia, and they wanted that to be more Indian inspired. So essentially wanted me to change the whole fantasy world, which was like 3/4 of my book. And some of the agents said that they would like Ria to spend more time in India, show us more of the struggles, because she lives with her mother and grandmother, and her mother is a tea picker. And so they're obviously not very well off. And so they wanted me to spend more time showing the struggles of
Mm.
their day-to-day life, which would, completely take away from the fact that this is a fantasy book and she's going, needs to go off on her adventure. And the feedback was really disheartening because that's, they wanted me to change my story completely. And I didn't want to do that. I definitely had moments where I thought story was not good at all, that I clearly didn't know what I was doing, that maybe I should change it. But when I thought about it, I'm like, no, this is literally a story I would have loved to read as a kid.
Yeah.
And I love reading fantasy books. And this story was not about just the struggles of, being poor or being Indian, or it was about this girl who was coming into her own and going off on this great adventure. And so there was a point, I think it was in June of 2019, when I was pretty certain that this book was one of those books that almost every author has, that gets shelved and will never see the light of day. And then I met you. And it was also, I should say, really amazing when I spoke to Amy Moranville, who is my editor, and is part of Mango and Marigold Press. And I was so nervous to have that first conversation with her, because I was expecting her to be like, I love the story, but you need to change, all of these things that I mentioned. And I was so excited to have the editor and like to sign a contract with you guys. And I was like crossing my fingers. And it was magical moment, that conversation with her, because she said, I love this. And all of the big picture issues and sort of edits that she was talking about had nothing to do about making this more Indian or less Indian or changing the core element of the story. And so that's when I just knew that that it had found the perfect house with Mango and Marigold Press. But I know from conversations with other authors from different backgrounds and culture that they have had very similar experiences. So I'm definitely not the only one, and that just begs the question that we need to have more conversations about diversity and inclusivity.
Yeah. So
Especially
that
children's
like I love hearing that story and that journey, because I think it's so important to highlight. My question to folks is like when somebody provides, like when other publishing houses provide this feedback of, oh, we already have Indian fantasy, we already have an Indian author. Like, do they provide that same feedback to white audiences?
Exactly.
I
No.
and I think the answer, like white authors, I think the answer is no. I think it's very important. Our panel is talking about diversity and inclusion. And the fact is, like the publishing houses have to make that first step
Yes.
in being proactive about really thinking critically and intersectionally
Mhm.
about whose works they are acquiring, what stories they're sharing, and what stories they're highlighting. I think it's a really important like lesson learned
Yes.
from your story here. And I'm curious, so what does diversity and inclusion look like for you as a writer? What did that journey look like? And how does it appear in Rhea?
So my journey with diversity and inclusion has, been really eye-opening. So like I mentioned before, I'm Indian, moved to the States only 8 years ago. So I basically spent my whole childhood, my college education, everything in India, in Mumbai. And, I love reading. And I grew up reading essentially all white children's books. And I love them. I love them. And when I sat to write Ria, when I decided that this is what I wanted to do, my first draft that was 70,000 words long had, yeah, and it was, so I must have spent, a good 3-4 months writing this book, had all white characters. Ria was called Rose, Rohan was called Bryant, they had a housekeeper called Suki, they ate pancakes for breakfast, they lived in this beautiful English countryside. And I didn't even think twice about it. Not one single time did it cross my mind that I was writing. And I don't think it's wrong for people to write, outside of their race or culture. Definitely not. But I never thought about the fact that I had done it. It was very subconscious. It came very naturally, organically for me to write about these characters. And I remember my writing teacher, when she read my first chapter, was so disappointed. And she looked at me and her only question to me was, Why are these characters white? Why haven't you written Indian characters? And the thing that shook me was that I didn't have an answer. If I had
Mm,
consciously done it for whatever reason, I would have been okay. But I hadn't thought about it. And that gave me such pause because I realized that subconsciously I had been whitewashed into thinking those are the stories that the world, kids, people want to read. That they
mhm,
are not interested in my story from Mumbai, from India, or any place in my country, or my culture, or my food. No, I didn't even think about it. And that's a really powerful thing. And it really shook me. And I went back home and I said, no, I'm going to change this. I'm not, has become now a mission for me to write
mm,
about Indians and South Asian kids. I have a daughter. It scares me to think that when she grows up and if she wants to be a writer, that she will think her story is not important to be
mhm.
shared, told, or celebrated, that somebody else won't find it interesting. So that really shook me. And this is why conversations and positive conversations about diversity and inclusion are really important. And the other thing is, I grew up reading children's books that had white characters in it. Right, I loved Anne of Green Gables. I loved all the Enid Blyton books that, very popular in the UK. Love Nancy Drew, Sweet Valley High. And I related to every single one of those books. That's the important part here, that I didn't look at them and read them and think, oh, I don't have blonde hair or blue eyes, and I don't eat, the foods they eat. I don't live in the places they eat. This is not going to, I'm not going to relate to this. No, I didn't feel like that at all. That's the important part about including conversations about diversity and inclusion, because it shows us that we are more similar than we think,
Mhm.
and that
Yeah.
our differences are to be celebrated. But at the core, we have the same hopes, the same dreams, the same desires, the same
Mhm.
fears. And I
You
think
bring
that is really important.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point because I think like diversity and inclusion for me is at the heart of the founding of our company. And I think even when we started our company, we were under the moniker Bharat Babies, and the title tagline at that time was "Inspired by India, made for little hands."
Mhm.
And inspired by India, I very purposely sort of we chose this term India because my sister and I, who's my sister is one of our co-founders, we understood that India often gets singularly understood as like either North Indian, like I do Bhangra and speak Hindi, or Hindu. And that
Mhm.
India was home to all these really rich traditions, different religious traditions, different cultural traditions, different languages that we as like South Asians didn't even see. Can you imagine like having one South Asian book that you could read and identify with, and even that one not representing you?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, when we started the company, our first book was a Hanuman and the Orange Sun, and our second book was very purposely Amal's Ramadan, like Amal's Eve. Very, very purposely because we wanted to showcase different communities, different religions, and our expanse of what stories we look to share and represent have expanded over the course of the 6 years. And I'm very proud of that. But I think it's very important for parents, for teachers, for educators to hear that these stories are meant for all children. That's it.
Absolutely right.
That is it. If you have a child who comes into your library and is like, I really like Harry Potter, you hand them this book too. That's
Yes.
it. That's it. Because I don't buy it when people tell me, they're like, oh, I'm not sure that, Jim is going to be able to relate to the Rhea character. And my answer is, I don't believe that
Mhm.
because I related Harry, Hermione, Nancy,
Yes.
all the characters in the Babysitters Club,
100%.
especially Claudia Kishi. And we're expansive human beings. We can
Yes.
relate if given the opportunity. And so we, as educators, as writers, as publishers, need to give the opportunity to not only the next generation, but this generation too. I think what's really powerful about some of these stories now is that parents, for the first time, are
Yeah.
seeing themselves in books. And that is so overwhelming. I can't tell you how many parents have like cried in my booth or write me like these just wonderful love letters saying how much this representation means to them.
I so agree. I got so many DMs when we did our cover reveal back in
I believe
mid
it.
September.
Hmm.
Like moms especially just saying that they were so excited for the book. and that they were so excited that their daughter or their son
Yes.
is going to now see themselves in a book and read this book, and they cannot wait for it. And I was also so surprised to find that boys were equally excited. I thought, oh, they'll see this girl on the cover and they'll be like, no, 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 no. And it was really touching. Like, it was a very important thing for me to do. And it just goes to show that there's so many of us that are craving for this.
Hmm.
It's like when you don't see it, you don't know kind of what you're missing, and you're like, okay. But once you start seeing it, it's like, give me more, give us
Yes.
more. And that's wonderful,
Hmm.
and
Can
important.
you? Yeah, it's so important. And so, Pyle, I'm curious. You talk a little bit about how, Rhea's background. She is from a community in India of tea pickers. Tea pickers traditionally aren't going to have that economic mobility.
Mhm.
Why is it important to write joyful stories, especially those that feature, diverse characters, representative characters? Tell me a little bit about that.
I think it is so important to feature diverse stories, joyful stories when talking about diverse voices, because we all have happy stories to tell. What I find with diverse narratives is that they sometimes get focused on the victim narrative, or an
Mhm.
immigration narrative, so and the struggles in that. And all of them are very important stories, but like me, there are so many kids that have had happy and wonderful stories and experiences, just like every other kid in the world. We've had our struggles, but we've also had a really fun life. And I wanted kids, Indian kids, South Asian kids, and all kids, to see that minority experiences, diverse experiences can be happy, can be awesome,
Mm.
can be badass, that they're just like everybody else.
They can be the heroes.
They can be the heroes. And why shouldn't they be the heroes? Why
Yeah.
should they always be the secondary characters? Because
Or
I
the
am the
teaching
hero of my own
character.
story, right? And why can't I have that and share that? And why does all of the fun have to just happen in Western countries? Why can't we have some of the fun? It's basically truly why, when I sat down to write, I was just like, why is Harry Potter going off on an adventure? Like, no. Why isn't a kid from India doing it? Why isn't a kid from
Yeah.
Bangladesh doing it? Why isn't a kid from Sri Lanka doing it? Why isn't a kid from Pakistan doing it? Why isn't a kid from Iran doing it? Like, why? Why not?
Exactly.
Why? That's the and I think it's important because it's also very important for kids from other backgrounds to see that what is termed as a minority background or a diverse voice, that kids from those backgrounds also have these wonderful experiences and stories that have to be shared and celebrated. And I'll give you an anecdote. Like, I have experienced so many times, people have asked me that, do you ever want to go back to India? Do you ever go back to India? And I'm like, yeah, I love going back. My family's there, my friends are there. I try to go back every year. If I'm lucky, I sneak in a second trip because I miss the food. I love seeing everybody. I love to go back for like Diwali and Christmas and have all of our family sort of festivities together. And they're like, oh. And I'm just like, why are you so surprised? And it's like, a lot of people think I have escaped my third world life or my third world country to come to the US. And it is the fact that you become stereotyped into that kind of narrative is why I want
Hmm.
to write joyful stories, because there are definitely people who have escaped harsher circumstances and come, and I do not disregard their stories at all. But there are a lot of people who are also coming because they want, new adventures and new experiences, and
Hmm.
carry a great deal of love for their own country and their own culture while coming to the States and having a great time here as well. And I want to change that sort of mentality that if you come from a culture that's different from mine, then you may have had a really bad time. You're escaping all of that. You want to let go of that. No, it is very important to share these, celebrate our stories, have happy narratives along with the stories of human struggle, human challenges. It is a huge, huge mission for me to write
I
joyful.
think one of the challenges I found when I was starting this company is that brown characters were often the ones who taught. They
Mhm.
taught a white child about Diwali, about Eid. They
Oh yeah.
taught a white child about, oh, you made fun of me and that hurt my feelings. And those are really valuable
Hmm.
stories for classrooms, for situations. I just want to see a story about like a brown girl named, Silaja,
Yeah.
who is having a snow day. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like,
Or
I
she's
would love
slaying
that.
a demon, you
Yeah,
know?
or slaying a
Mm,
demon.
yeah.
Like, I think it's so incredibly important. And I tell our authors and illustrators, I look for stories of the everyday and the extraordinary, and I think Rhea is a wonderful example of the mix of those
Mhm.
two. I see her everyday story. I see her like going to school. I see her celebrating her birthday. And then I see the extraordinary of
Mhm.
her, kicking butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think it's so phenomenal
It
and
is.
so necessary and something that for some reason had yet to come to be. It's
Mhm.
taken, 7, 8 years now for all of that to start to be considered. It's still not considered
No,
normal. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think so.
no.
Major publishing houses still have a hard time balancing that narrative, balancing that way.
100%. The reason why I want to write joyful stories is because I want to show other facets of our experiences. Diverse voices and minority voices tend to just get compartmentalized into this one narrative that has been perpetuated, which again is very important, but we're just seeing so much of it that the other narratives and the other facets of our lives just don't get enough importance. And it's all of us, we could be of any race, any color, any culture, any nationality. We are multifaceted, and it's important to have that shown to readers, especially young readers, because that opens up your mind. It makes you
Absolutely.
well read, well rounded, well balanced. I think it creates a great deal of empathy because you start seeing the similarities and the differences. You start seeing that at the core we are the same. And
Mhm.
you know if nothing else in the world today, with the amount of stuff that we're dealing with socially, economically, politically, it is an important thing that will help create more love and more empathy.
I love that. So I guess one of the questions I would love to ask you is what are the types of stories you're looking to forward to seeing in the next 5 years, especially those that maybe feature the South Asian audience or perspective, or what are you looking forward to reading?
Well, I definitely am looking forward to reading stories, like you said before, of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Just being South Asian is not the focus, it's just a part of
Yes.
that, kid's life. And so that's one. The other thing is I would love for the publishers' mindsets to change, to include all of these narratives and not feel like, oh, we already have one or two, we can't do more because that might create, competition, or it might just be the same story. No, just want to touch upon the fact that I keep using own voices when I talk about my book. And the thing to remember with own voices is that everyone's voice is different, just like
Mhm.
different, white people have different experiences. It's the same thing with South Asian, it's the same thing with Black communities, it is the same thing with everybody, that it not one voice is not the same as the other. And so to remember that and publish stories that are well written, that have great story and plot, and choose to publish them because of that, and not to just be like, oh, I can't do more because I already have one. And I would love for parents, teachers, educators, kids to reach out for books that with characters that may not look like them, because they will still relate to them, and that they will know
Yeah.
that they don't shy away from those kinds of books because they're like, oh, we don't look the same, or I don't think we might, be the same. But that they would just be like, oh, I love fantasy. Oh, there's Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar. I'm gonna go pick it up, regardless
Yeah.
of from where they come from. I would love to see those shifts in the
Yeah.
next 5 years.
Yeah, I think for me as a publisher, one of the things I am looking for is some of those ordinary stories. And I think if you look at sort of our lineage of how we've acquired manuscripts, you can
Mhm.
start to see that. And I'm also just really interested in stories that push the boundaries, in
Mhm.
stories that have yet to be told and that have been told that they cannot be told
Yes,
for generations.
yes.
Frankly, I'm really excited for giving those stories space and place in the bookshelves, in the canon, because once we publish it, we force you to talk about it. And I think that's such an important moment of activism, a moment of, taking back and
Mhm.
helping to change a mindset of a generation. I really do.
I so agree. I love that.
In closing, what are some ways that educators and parents can include these conversations about diversity, representation, inclusion, not only at school, but also maybe even in the daily life? How can they do that?
That's a really great question. I think to begin with, just read more multicultural content. You bring those books into your
That
life.
bookshelf audit is so important.
It is so important. I think it just opens up conversations that you would not have had before. And, text reading about cultures in a textbook and, stuff like that is boring. But reading a novel, you just consume that information so organically. Or you can learn about new cultures, new traditions, new foods. You can Google these things with your kids. You can look up recipes. You can really make it part of your life. So I would say definitely read. Have make that bookshelf bright and diverse. Is
Yes.
I would say number one. I think another cool way that you could incorporate it in, a classroom or with your kids is to sort of have the kids write up what they think is different about each other, like create a chart in your school, and they can write about, oh, I have blonde hair, blue eyes, I have black hair, brown eyes, show all of these differences, and then have another column for what are your hopes, what are your dreams, what are your desires, what are your passions, what are your fears, what are your traditions. And I think it will be so wonderful because they will see that the kid down the road, their neighbor who they probably thought was exactly like them, also has very different traditions from their
Yeah.
own,
Mhm.
as different as a brown kid in their class, that they're all different, but they are the same. And again, it would, open up room for conversation. Do you have any?
I think for me, a big piece too is thinking about some of the gateway books. I talked a little bit about holidays earlier in our conversation. And the reason why some of our early books are about holidays is because they are gateways. They're really easy ways to introduce the
And fun.
discussion of, yeah, and fun of what representation looks like. And I think it's also really important, and we work very hard to do it in our books, to understand that the way Diwali looks for Hindus is different the way Diwali looks for Jains, for Sikhs, for Buddhists, the
Mhm.
way Eid looks for, Amal, our Bengali, character is different from how Eid looks for a Somali community, for African Muslims, for Middle Eastern Muslims. And so I think what's also very important as we start to introduce these stories to our children is to allow them space to ask candid questions
Oh, yes.
and to be open as a parent, as an educator, as a guide,
Hmm.
to be open to saying, I don't know, let's find out.
Yes.
And then to do the research yourself.
Hmm.
Again, as an educator, as a parent, instead of, because I think in this age of digital, there
So
are lots of answers
yeah.
online. And I encourage people to do some of that early work to help to educate your children and then reach out to communities of color so that the onus isn't always on communities of color to educate white communities.
It's
It's one of the
exhausting.
most frustrating and challenging parts of being a minority and having these minority books on the shelves is that often we're asked to represent and tell and share every single thing, and we don't have the capacity to do that. And so take that time to do that research, to ask the questions, and then come,
I
because
love that.
there's nothing more powerful than having a child or a parent who has a really like well thought out question. I love that. I'm like,
I
wow, you've done some research,
100%.
you've done some stuff.
And you
Yeah.
know what? That also you end up setting an example for the kids
Yes.
as well. So they see
Exactly.
that they see an older person, their parents, their teachers, doing the homework, doing the research, taking the time to understand, and then
Mhm.
bringing this to the table so you can have a really good conversation. And I think that sort of way of thinking will seep into the kids that are exposed to that and
Agree.
will automatically think to do the same when they come across new things that they would want to know more about.
Yep.
Yeah,
100%. Well, we have reached our time, Pile Doshi. It has been a pleasure to talk to you.
such
I
fun.
am curious because I know you have an answer to it. Do you think you could tell the audience what the title of your second book in the Chronicles of Astranthia series
Yes,
is?
I can. The second book in the Chronicles of Astranthia, the sequel to Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, is going to be called Ta-da! Rhea and the Sorcerer of Shadows.
I am obsessed. I can't wait. Thank you to the ALA community for having us here today for us to talk about brown and black joy in fantasy diversity and inclusion. Please feel free to follow us, Pile Doshi, on Instagram. Feel free to follow our press, Mango and Marigold Press. We're on all of the social media, and
Wonderful.
we look forward to many more conversations. Thank you all.
Thank you guys so much.